That's right. It is time for another edition of Orange and Blue Today. We are presented by Champ Honda, Cecil Lammey, Andrew Mason. Our training camp previews continue here on the show. And today, offensive tackle. And don't you feel better? And maybe not since the days of Ryan Clady, Ryan Harris. Okay, we feel pretty good about these tackles. I'll throw in some love for our man Orlando Franklin as well. But the tackle situation, before we jump into the players, Mace, I kind of feel good about the two starters they have right now.
So when you're talking Ryan Clady, Ryan Harris, you're referring to like 08, 09, 2010, not 2015 when effectively Ryan Harris eventually had to replace Ryan Clady.
Right. I'm talking about the bookends, right?
Yeah. Because I would argue this is the best I felt about the Broncos tackle situation since right before Ryan Clady got hurt in 2015. I felt they were in good shape because remember they were going to give Tyson Brilo a second-round pick, a whirl at one of the spots, and of course you had Ryan Clady at left tackle, who was coming off of a Pro Bowl season. Then he got hurt. That necessitated Ryan Harris coming in. Later on that year, you had Tyler Columbus having to come in as well, and Michael Schofield having to get time at right tackle, and we know how that went. Yeah, probably for me, it's the best I've felt since May of 2015 about the tackle position, which says a lot. And then, of course, but the original sin at right tackle was moving Orlando Franklin away from that spot after the 2013 season, because that's what started the revolving door that the Broncos hope is about to stop spinning here with Mike McGlinchey coming in.
Yeah, and we call it the curse of Orlando Franklin. We'll get to McGlinchey in just a second. The new offensive line coach and Zach Strief. And I can't get into details because we're not supposed to say what we heard during practice. I just like his coaching style. I like his energy. I like the way he connects with players. Again, nothing specific, but you feel good. And we've said it before on this show. It bears repeating. Butch Berry was a larger sin than Nathaniel Hackett at head coach. So going from Berry to Strief, I think you'll see good play and a good response from all these guys up front.
It's a good sign. And for Zach Strief, don't forget, this is his first time being the number one offensive line coach rather than the assistant O-line coach. So he's making a level jump here to pull off this job. But so far, so good from Zach Strief. And I think you talk about the approach. And as we get to discussing Garrett Bolles in particular, the approach is what matters, because we know Garrett Bolles responds to a certain type of coaching, and it's not the screamer brand of coaching. It is the more empathetic, pat on the shoulder, very even-keeled, technical type of coaching. What he got from Mike Munchak, which turned his career around, Zach Strief, in terms of his style, we'll learn more about him as an O-line coach over time and how good he is. But at least in terms of his style and his manner of teaching is much more like Munch than what you had with Butch Berry last year, which was the complete opposite direction.
Yeah, not so very good. My grandma always said, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. So moving right along, Garrett Bolles and the response from Bolles. What are the expectations? I mean, Bolles is staring at either a short-term extension, perhaps with good play, or perhaps the Broncos are looking for a next tackle, a left tackle after this season.
Yeah, the big number that comes into play is $16 million, because that's what the Broncos save if they cut Garrett Bolles in the coming off season. So this is very much like 2020 when Bolles was going into his contract year. The Broncos did not pick up the fifth-year option. This is the fork in the road year for Garrett Bolles, having to prove himself to a new coaching staff. And I don't think the Broncos will hesitate to move on from him if he doesn't deliver the goods. So here he is with that contract weighing over him, also coming off of a year in which he fractured his ankle and missed of course, the final 12 games of the season. The good sign for him is that he's completely healthy. He was out there throughout OTAs. Did not look to me to be in any way affected by that injury, which is key, because that's the sort of injury that if you suffer it as an offensive lineman in your 30s, it can mess you up and effectively end things for you. Garrett Bolles, is on the other side of 30, 31 years old this year. So it's a good sign that he looked as he did out there. But as Sean Payton has said about other positions, and we could say about offensive tackle and Garrett Bolles working in this offense, we're going to learn a lot more in camp once they put the pads on and you start seeing, and we're going to find out just how physical he can be. I think the start for Garrett Bolles is, I think his attitude is in the right place. I think headspace wise, he's in the right place, and he's getting the right kind of teaching. So those three things right there, I think, give him a chance to make sure that this isn't his last year as a Denver Bronco.
Right. You love the maturation and the leadership. Yes, leadership from Garrett Bolles, and just working through the processes and, dealing with a lot and then making the most of his situation. How much, before we get to McGlinchey, how much will the system help Bolles? Because I'm thinking quick passes. I'm thinking, timing, rhythm, and I'm thinking Bolles won't have to engage his man for too long based on the decisions Russell Wilson should be making.
We've talked about this with the quarterbacks and receivers, and it's going to help Garrett Bolles out tremendously. That he should have less onus on him in terms of having to maintain his blocks for more than a couple of seconds. The ball should be out quickly. I think it's going to help him gain some confidence. I think the emphasis on the ground game and the more power-based attack, I think that's going to help Garrett Bolles as well. I think it's going to play into his instincts and what he does best as a player, which is play with some drive, play with some power, and get him attacking rather than retreating. That's a key thing. When Garrett Bolles gets into trouble, it's when he's in retreat kind of mode, and that's when he resorts to the grab. It's something that I think you're always going to be concerned about with him, but I think Sean Payton is setting this offense up to where they're going to minimize Bolles' deficiencies as a player as much as possible. I think this is going to be a good fit for him. And the question then becomes for the Broncos, do they decide he's worth that big contract next year? Or you mentioned possibly a renegotiation. And that, I think, is, if you're Garrett Bolles, the best possible outcome here, because I don't think we're going to be talking about the Broncos just having him on a $20 million cap figure next year. I think the best possible outcome is Bolles doing enough to where they say, all right, we're going to reduce that cap number for 2024 because it's 20 million, 16 the Broncos can save, and then 4 million dead money if they cut him. But you get that cap number down, but then you add a couple of years beyond that and kick in more money guaranteed. And we know guaranteed money is not an issue for this ownership group. They can put it in escrow. They got all the cash they need. So, so if we're talking about Garrett Bolles toward the end of this season, early next year, having a restructured contract and throwing a couple of years on that and reducing the cap figure from 20 million in next year, maybe around 10 or 11 million, I think that's a successful season for Garrett Bolles and a successful outcome for the Broncos, because then that's another thing that you're not worried about going into next year's draft. And look, and you and I know this team has a lot of needs on the roster. We don't need them to be creating another need at left tackle if at all possible.
Right. The best thing is for Garrett Bolles to work out. It's a win-win for everybody. And I'll know this, like, I'm not betting against Garrett Bolles again. He proved everybody wrong. So, like, yeah, can Bolles do it? Sure. Now we got to see him do it. On the other side, Mike McGlinchey's going to hold more than Bolles. By the way, for fans who get upset at Bolles, like, McGlinchey's likely to hold more because he's 6'9". Tall tackles hold. It's not a problem. It's just what you kind of have to do because it's physics, everybody. You're large and in charge. And with this power game, that fits McGlinchey to a T.
It does. I mean, he's held his own working in the zone scheme in San Francisco, but now you feel like you're in a situation for him that more reflects what his skill set is. I think it's a reason why he's very excited to come to Denver. Of course, he had 5 years in San Francisco. They did pick up the 5th-year option on him, but then saw fit to let him go. And I think you mentioned the holding penalties. I think that's part and parcel of it as well. But I don't think it's just on McGlinchey. They've got other priorities that they've got to take care of contractually. It's more like when the Broncos had to make some tough choices after 2015 and let Malik Jackson and Dane Trevathan go. It's not the player isn't good. It's just that there are other priorities. The fair question to ask is he worth a $17 million a year cap figure? That's fair. And I don't think we're talking about a player who's going to live up to that, but you had to go pay extra, I think, to try to stabilize a position that's never been stable. And Cease, they've tried everything at right tackle, including free agency. They've tried the mid-level free agent, Don Stevenson, Menelik Watson. They've tried the high-level free agent, Juwan James, giving him a big contract. They tried Michael Schofield, who they got on day 2 of the draft. They've been through reclamation projects. They even had briefly Cyrus Kwangjo. Remember him? I believe back late in the 2017 season, they trade for Jared Valdir. I mean, you just go down the list of one guy after another. Hope that he solves it. He has a better health record than Juwan James did. So that, I think, is going to work in his favor. I think the scheme's going to work in his favor as well. If we're talking about Mike McGlinchey over the next 3 years, playing in 40-plus games of a possible 51 in the regular season, and if he can cut his holding penalties a bit, we're not saying he has to be all-world, but if he's pretty good, you might say, yeah, there's still a bit of an overpay for it, but you'd be happy to do that if this comes to an end. I mean, right tackle is the least stable spot on the roster in the last decade, which is saying a lot because of what we know about quarterback. So you feel good about that. You feel good about the starters. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the only concern I have is a slight overpay, but I think it was something you had to do.
Yeah, and I quoted this in one of our meetings. I don't think anyone but you and me and James Marilat and you were the ones that got it, but you could get a cheeseburger anywhere. You come to Tchotchke's for the atmosphere and the attitude.
I heard that. I thought that was funny. Yes.
I bring up the young guys were sitting in the meeting like just straight face. They didn't know. They didn't know.
They got to watch off his face.
But let's talk about attitude before we get to the reserves, and a very good reserve at the top of the reserve list. But I love the fact that your offensive line is kind of going to lead the charge. Your attitude up front. When you play the Denver Broncos on Monday, you're going to remember that you played, because this line, and we'll get to interior offensive line in another show, but in this show with the tackles, they're going to beat you up.
You're paying for that too. Garrett Bolles had a big contract late in 2020, and McGlinchey did as well. I mean, if you can get a good idea of a team's priorities from the contractual and the draft resources that they invest in certain positions. And so we look at the Broncos and we see 2 tackles that have average annual values on their contracts over the course of their contracts that are north of $16 million. That tells you what is a priority here, specifically to Sean Payton giving McGlinchey this contract and making him one of the first guys they brought in. It is crucial to what he's trying to accomplish. There's even more to discuss when we get to the interior offensive line show, but that's the sign right there. You have and oh, by the way, both of those were first round picks as well. So these are guys that came into the draft with a pretty reasonable pedigree. And although Garrett Bolles, I think, has frustrated fans over time, I think we can say now he has not been a disappointment of a first-round pick for the Denver Broncos. Yes. Because we are talking about him being a starter here in year 7 and being a guy who earned another contract. By that definition, Cease, the pick has been a successful one. There's a lot that we can critique about the John Elway era as general manager. Believe it or not, we look at the Garrett Bolles pick now and say that was pretty solid. Now, yes, they could have picked Ryan Ramczyk, but it wasn't a whiff to take Garrett Bolles.
Right. Right. And behind the starters, bringing back Cam Fleming just makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Like they've got some other guys to keep an eye on. It is a training camp preview. I'll be watching like an Isaiah Prince, stuff like that. But Cam Fleming, it's the Tommy Boy guarantee on the box. Like it just makes you feel good. Like you got McGlinchey, you got Bolles. Oh, and we got Cam Fleming. Is it, that's awesome.
I always like to look at every position group and say, all right, is there some guy in reserve who's got some decent starting experience that you can trust if they have to go in there? Cam Fleming's as good as you'll find for a swing tackle backup, and we saw it underscored last year by the fact that he worked on both sides. And it's interesting to look at Cam Fleming here. This is his third year with the Broncos, third different offensive line coach that he's had, and everybody has deemed him valuable. Now, that being said, they didn't bring in Fleming until the start of training camp last year. He sat on the shelf for a while. Broncos make sure they took care of that in May by bringing him back, and that's a question of just getting his conditioning up to speed. But he's a good guy in the locker room. That counts as well. Fleming, he's also sees kind of evolving into one of those coach on the field types, that he's highly intelligent and he knows how to help the guys that are in front of him. Will tell them things that maybe they're not seeing. It's a perfect role for him. I honestly look at Fleming being there. I love the fact that you don't have to worry if you lose a tackle. But I think the other thing is you love having a guy in there who can really help out. And I think in particular will help Garrett Bolles, because sometimes Bolles, he still needs kind of that other set of eyes kind of watching out for him. And Fleming can very much be that.
Yeah. And you wonder, Mace, just wondering aloud, like, is Fleming on a Zach Strief kind of path? If he wants to, coaching would be there for him.
Maybe. I think that's something to keep an eye on, especially we see Sean Payton's willingness to have former players and make the transition to the sideline. He's got a couple of guys on the staff that are making the immediate transition. Zach Strief, it was interesting. He detoured to the broadcast booth for a little bit. He was working in the Saints radio broadcast before he moved into coaching. So he's had a really interesting little path there that brought him to this point. But I think Cam could be a guy a couple of years from now that we're talking about being somebody who lands on the Broncos staff. But right now, kind of fills that dual role of an extra set of eyes to help out, good locker room presence, and someone who, if he has to come in there, you're not worried about. And that was the thing. For all the things that went wrong last year, all the areas where the roster got caught short, Cam Fleming for Garrett Bolles, you weren't caught short. Like he more than held his own last year when he had to come in and play extensively.
Orange and Blue today, presented by Sean Ponda. Mace, any other reserves that you'd like to highlight here in a training camp preview? I did mention Isaiah Prince, Ohio State prospects, been in the league a while.
Yeah.
They've got some different, Quinn Bailey's kicking around somewhere, right? So you've got some names, and we'll see who can make a splash in camp.
Yeah, you've got Demontre Jacobs in the mix. He's another undrafted rookie that they brought in. Alex Palshevsky, same thing. Don't be surprised if you see at least one of them stick in there. Christian DeLauro is also around there. And really, I think I think at least one of those undrafted rookies is going to stick on the practice squad. And really, I mean, if you decide to go heavy on the offensive line, I think there's an opening for an extra tackle to be there. Now, I think if I were betting today on the offensive line composition, I'd bet on one swing tackle on the 53, and then maybe someone like Quinn Bailey sticks who can swing between guard and tackle, and that's your extra tackle. But we'll find out. Look, we discussed this on the wide receiver show. If Peyton sees somebody he likes that's doesn't have the draft pedigree, he won't hesitate to keep that player.
Nope. Keep the best guys. And that's what we're fixing to find out in training camp. Our training camp previews continue. It's Orange Blue today, presented by Sean Honda. He's Andrew Mason. I'm Cecil Lammey. We've talked plenty of tackles. So how about we talk some offensive guards? And we'll do that coming up next. So everyone out there, thanks for watching. Stay tuned and stay frosty.